Hello, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another reading vlog where I'm gonna be reading Divine Rivals. So Divine Rivals is the first book in the Letters of Enchantment series, which is a fantasy romance series. And recently I have read some other fantasy romances. I have read The Crowns of Nyaxia. I still don't know how to say that name. And I have read Fourth Wing. And Crowns of Nyaxia, like the first book, Serpents and the Wings of Night, and the novella, Six Scorched Roses, they did really work for me. I really enjoyed them. But then the last book, The Ashes in the Star-Cursed King, possibly, I really did not like. And then Fourth Wing, like, it was okay, but it was not, it didn't really work for me as well as it worked for everyone else, because almost everyone loves that book. So, not all of those books work for me. And even last year, I feel like it was pretty like 50-50 as well, like the ones that worked for me and the ones that didn't. But I have been seeing people reading this book and loving it. So, I decided to give it a try as well. And if you have watched any of my videos, you know that I do love fantasy, but I don't like romance. So, I mean, it's very rare that I do enjoy romance, and it does work better it's in another setting like fantasy or science fiction or something else than if it's just romance, but it's still definitely not a genre that I like. I am definitely not a romance reader, and the fact that the main character in this book has my name is not gonna make it better for me. But anyway, let's get into the vlog. Okay, so I am 30% into Divine Rivals and we are following Iris and Roman. And yes, the fact that the main character has my name does bother me. But moving on, they are both journalists and Iris is trying to keep her family together because her brother is missing at war and her mom is struggling with addiction. And so she thinks that the only way to help her family is to win a promotion at work. And Roman is obviously wanting the same promotion. And when I say that her brother is missing at war, this is a war of basically their gods, and we don't really yet know exactly like what the war is or why it's happening, but we know that some gods are at war. And Iris is writing to her brother and she like sends the letters and they magically appear to Roman. And at first he doesn't reply, but then he just sends a letter back saying that he's not her brother, but he doesn't say who he is. But he knows that the person sending the letters is Iris. And so they keep talking back and forth and, getting to know each other and, creating a connection. But that is kind of a problem to me because he knows that he's talking to her. And obviously, like, they know each other in real life. They work together. And he knows that he's talking to her. But she doesn't know that she's talking to him. And that, like, for me is not okay. That is definitely a problem because, like, he's just lying to her. I mean, not lying, but, like, he's hiding it, And another problem is the fact that, like, this is a fantasy romance, but we're not really getting much of the fantasy. There is obviously, like, the magical element of the letters getting to Roman and back to Iris, like, magically. And we know that the gods are at war, but we have barely learned anything about that. We learned like half of a myth about their gods, and that is pretty much it. And I do like the main character, but like I don't love her. Like, she's okay. And Roman, I don't really know him enough to know if I've even like him or not. But again, like, they're okay. And I feel like the whole book for me up until this point is just okay. So like, I'm liking it, but I'm not loving it. And I don't know if this is just like a me problem and I just had the wrong expectations for this book, but I definitely expected more fantasy than we are getting, because so far we're just following Iris on her life as a journalist, trying to, save her family and trying to get that promotion at her job. And I mean, that is interesting if that's the kind of thing you are like wanting to read, but I was expecting, like I said, more fantasy, more like magic and magical beings and all of that. So I am hoping it will get more into that in the next two parts, because I finished part one. So I'm hoping the next two parts are more magical. And yeah, like I'm liking it, but I'm not loving it. But I will read part two and I will be back to tell you how that goes. Okay, so I am 59% into the Vine Rivals, and we obviously continue to follow Iris, and she has like changed her life completely. She's in a whole completely different setting than she was in part one, but she keeps communicating with Roman with the letters, and they keep getting to know each other better. And again, he keeps getting to know her better, but she doesn't know who he is. And even when she asks like for any personal information, he doesn't really give her the full truth, and that definitely continues to bother me. But we have learned more about the like fantastical part of this world, which I have definitely enjoyed. We learned more about like the myths of the gods and also some like magical creatures, but it's still not as much like fantasy heavy as I would have liked or as I expected. And it just feels more like a historical fiction book, which is not really something I tend to enjoy. So, I mean, it has gotten more my kind of book, but it's still not really like working for me. And in terms of the romance part, I am really not like invested in that at all. Like I don't care, could not care less. And I feel like I don't even care about the characters enough to like care about their individual stories. And I definitely don't care about them enough to care about their romance. And so I don't know, like my feelings towards this book are still pretty much the same as they were at the end of part one. Like I like it, but I don't love it. And yes, we have gotten some more fantasy elements, which I do enjoy. And we are learning more about the war, which I also enjoy. But the whole like romance part of it is just not really working for me. And like, I am not a romance reader, so this might definitely be a me problem, and it probably is, because almost everyone that I have seen like reviewing this book has like loved it. And so I am assuming this is a me problem. So don't really like take what I'm saying into consideration, but it's just really not working for me. And honestly, like I don't know how it could start working for me, like how it could get better. I don't think that it could. I don't think that it can. And I am hoping like the other part of the book gets better, like the fantasy part, because that is what I am like kind of invested in. Not that much, but like the only thing I am a little invested in is like the fantasy part and the war part of the story. And oh, we have also learned, like speaking of the fantasy part, we have learned how like the letters are magically appearing to Iris and Roman. So that was actually interesting, and maybe we'll learn a little more about that, because that has like a connection to the past, like some characters from the past, and I'm wondering if we will learn more about that, because that was pretty interesting. And then yeah, like the whole gods thing, like that is pretty cool, and I would like to learn more about the gods and the reason why they are now at war. Like that is the interesting part to me. But anyway, I am hoping we will get more of that in part 3, and so I will read that and I will let you know how that goes. Okay, so I have finished Divine Rivals, and this last third, part three, was definitely more exciting because there was like more action, there were more things happening, and so I was actually like a bit more invested in the plot. But having said that, I still didn't love it. It still didn't have as much fantasy as I would have liked, even though, like I said, we did get a little more towards this like last third, maybe even more than the last third. And the romance, I never really cared about it. Like I definitely, like I said, I didn't like the build-up. I definitely had some issues with it. And then it was so like abrupt, and I also didn't really like that. And I just feel like the book focused much more on the romance part than the fantasy part. But I did like the action that we did get towards the end, and the characters, like, they were okay. I never really loved them, but I also didn't dislike them. They were okay, and I mean that for the main characters, but also like the side characters that we met. They were all just okay. There was no one that I was like obsessed with. There was no one that I loved. There was no one that I was like waiting to see when they were not in the page. And there was like the plot twist or reveal. It was like okay. Again, like I didn't really care about it, but I also it wasn't bad. But the end, like the epilogue, was actually fun. Like I liked what happened there. It definitely could make things more interesting for the future. But again, it was just okay. But let's just go into my final thoughts. So starting off with the characters, like I said, they were all okay. There was no one that I loved, but like Iris specifically, she was like an interesting character, and I did like her plot. Like I liked what she was trying to do, and I was invested in her like trying to find her brother and everything that she was like willing to do to get to that point to achieve her goal. I did like that, but I felt like there was nothing about her that just made me love her, and I never really connected that much to her either. And then Roman, he was like, again, okay, but I connected to him even less than Iris. And like I said, there were some things that he did that I did not like I have mentioned. And then the other side characters, they were okay. There were like a couple of characters that they were interesting. I liked the idea of them, but there was no one that like stole the show for me or anything. They were just there, but like if they weren't, it wouldn't really change anything. You know what I mean? And the plot, like I said, the idea, the premise was really interesting, and I just expected we would learn more about the fantasy, about the gods, and like maybe we will in the future books, but I would have liked to get to know more about this world that the book is set in the first book. And that's not really what we got. And like I also said, we just focused so much more on the romance side, and I didn't like it. Like I had problems with it from the beginning, and I get that you would need to have some kind of intrigue to keep the romance interesting, but I just did not like the way that it was done. I mean, not the way that it was done, like the author's execution. That's not really the problem, I think. I just don't like the actual thing that happened. I don't think I would ever like it, like in any context. And I don't know if it was because I wasn't getting the fantasy that I was expecting, or if it really was like very slow paced, but I just felt like it was very slow paced, and it was not, again, the pacing that I was wanting and expecting from this story. And like I said, the epilogue, it was interesting. It definitely made things like possibly very interesting for the future. But having said that, I don't think it has made me interested enough to read the next book, to like keep going with the series. And when I finished the book, I was like, okay, this actually got a lot better. So maybe I'm gonna give it 3.5. But since last night, which was when I finished it, I've been thinking, and like I said, it didn't really make me want to keep going with the series, and the rest of the book was just not really what I wanted. So I think I'm gonna give it 3 stars because I didn't dislike it, but I also was never really excited about it. It was, an okay book, but it just didn't work for me the way that I wanted it to. And so yeah, I don't know if fantasy romance just isn't for me because I mean there are some that do work for me, but I feel like in general they don't, and maybe it's just because they always focus more on the romance that I'm expecting, which, might be a me problem because it's a fantasy romance and I'm always expecting more fantasy than romance, and again, that is probably a me problem. But on the other hand, there are some that do work for me, but it's a very hit or miss kind of genre, subgenre for me. But yeah, this is the end of the video and thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have enjoyed it, and if you did, give it a like and subscribe, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!